Well, howdy. This is a story of me replacing the rear end on my 1962 Chevy panel van. I figured I would be changing the rear end someday eventually anyways. The rear end was an Eaton, no parts available, with a 3.99 ratio. Ideally, you would look for a 63 through about 69 C10 with coil spring rear end. They would be about the same width, and the other mods shouldn't be too bad. One evening, I came across a rear end for a 1968 GMC with leaf springs. Not ideal, but the $100 price convinced me to try it. I picked it up pretty quick. This one turned out to be a 10 bolt with a 8.5 inch ring gear and 354 gears. Now I will have to cut off the leaf spring pads, add purchase, cut off the panhard bar mount off the old axle and weld it to the new one, and figure out something to do with the parking brake cables. I did have to make a new flare end to the brake line and replace the brake hose going to the rear end. Since I was going to have to be adding purchase, I figured I needed to research the pinion angle that all the fancy car guys talk about. They were talking math and angles and slope and phasing and what happens when it's wrong. When I bought my 62, it was just a roller. No engine, no transmission, no drive shaft, no gas tank, no radiator, no lot of things. I made mounts to fit and just threw them in the truck. I didn't know about angles and stuff. Thought if it fits, it should work. And it kinda did. So I wanted to see what my current angles are. Used my electronic angle slope box thingy. So allow me to show you digitally on my sketchy program. This shows how it is supposed to look. The transmission and pinion angles are close to the same and a little angle at each end of the drive shaft. Now, this shows how mine was. Maybe a little enhancement for effect. See how my transmission is going up, sharp angle to the drive shaft, and almost in line with the pinion shaft. Now, after figuring this out, I probably could just modify the transmission bracket and keep using the Eaton as it is. But I have the stuff here. Let's go ahead and change the rear end and not worry about it for later. If you didn't know already, when working on an old vehicle, it's never just one thing. I removed the gas tank because it was going to be in the way a lot, and there would be some welding. Modify the parking brake cable. I removed the tires, shocks, parking brake cables, the big old U-bolts. I set jack stands right behind the trailing arms, lowered the truck to where I could slide the axle off the arms onto the stands. Now the old rear end is off. I recently bought a plasma cutter that helped me hack off the unneeded pieces from the 68 rear end. Unfortunately, the plasma cutter can't get into the corners, so there was cutting and grinding with the angle grinder, but that went much quicker than I anticipated. Right now is the panhard bar mount. Since everything is kind of blown apart already, now would be a good time to replace the bushings on the trailing arms. They came out pretty easy. There are videos on different ways to replace these. My press worked not too bad once I got the right setup. I cut some scrap metal to act as spacers so not to bend the bushing tabs in. I experimented with sockets to get the right diameter and length, and some pieces from my ball joint / U-joint press. Before I remounted the trailing arms, I will modify the transmission mount. This truck has like an X frame, and there is a not very large opening the drive shaft must go through. If I lower it too much, the shaft will rub. So I commenced to hacking up and reinforcing the mount. Using the plasma cutter and angle grinder and some 1.5-inch steel bar, I have the mount in and it should be fine. Installing the trailing arms that now have new bushings went pretty well. There is a new angle on the dangle of the transmission now. So let's put the new to this truck rear end on and see if we can have acceptable angles and locate where the panhard bar mount should go. I have the perches in place and axle on, kind of reverse order of how I removed the axle. And it is held steady with the U-bolts. I raised the truck and put these tall stands under the axles. Raised them until they were supporting the weight of the rear of the truck. I figured this would simulate the regular ride height. I slightly loosened the U-bolts just enough to be able to rotate the differential until the angle was matching the transmission. I made unsightly tack welded the axles to the perches. I bolted the panhard bar to the mount and tack welded the mount in place on the axle. Take the rear end off again for better booger welding and flat black paint to disguise everything. On to the parking brake cables. The 62s are longer than the 68s. I thought about using 1/8-inch ferrules and stops and basically splice the cables together, which would probably work, but thought it would be better and look better if I installed the 62 cables on the 68 rear end that's going on the 62 panel truck. There are some modifications, but not a great deal. For safety and liability reasons, I am not going to explain in detail how I did it, but it does appear to be possible. I removed the rear differential cover. The guy I bought it from said it was good, and I'm sure it is, but I don't think he was the original owner, so there may have been something a previous owner did. And I could confirm the gear ratio and look for anything obvious. Not that I would really be able to recognize it if I saw it, but the ring gear was marked by something resembling a dot matrix printer. I figured in 1968 it would have been stamped, so maybe the gears were replaced. If you know, I'd appreciate the info so I can add it to my notebook. Thanks. I put some gasket maker on the differential pan, installed it loosely for a while, let it set, then tightened it, and let that set overnight before I added the gear oil. The gas tank is from a 1990s van with still more questionable modifications, but it works. Again, I'm not sharing the details. You know, liability things. I moved the truck a little, and sounds like the U-joint is rubbing the parking brake assembly slightly. So before going too crazy on another fabrication project, I just removed the parking brake assembly that is mounted in the frame. Figured if the noise goes away, I will probably add brackets below the frame later on. Got that fixed, and all I have left to do is take it to highway speed. maybe it won't shake over 70 anymore. Thanks for watching.